No one who turns their head back. Friends, please be seated. So James and John are kind of irritated at the lack of welcome that they receive in the town that they're headed towards, and probably like more of us than want to admit, when we are rejected, they want to call fire and brimstone down on that town and burn it to the ground. How many of you have had a moment in your life where someone has said something mean to you or rejected you or stood against a plan that you have, and in that moment what you want is them gone? Maybe you're not inclined to call down fire and brimstone. I admit that I have had some apocalyptic wishes at times in my life. Maybe you do rage prayers. To feel anger at being rejected, it is normal. To call down violence to get what you want is certainly the way the world around us works far too often. And Jesus, he's a bit annoyed. He's a bit testy. He rebukes James and John, having just had a conversation with them about how they will indeed not get to be first. He rebukes them because they just don't seem to get it. I would be a little bit irritated if I were Jesus, and yet that irritation seems to leak into these conversations that he has along the road. Let the dead bury their dead. Friends, how many of you have gone home or put plans in your life on hold to care for a loved one who is sick and dying? That is a kind and loving and wonderful thing to do. And yet Jesus, at this point and in this moment, says, nope, what's important is following me. What's important is living out the reign of God. Jesus knows exactly what that reign is going to look like in his life. The text says he sets his face to Jerusalem. Jesus has just spent all of this time with people. He's healed a girl. He's raised somebody from the dead. He has fed thousands of people. He has freed captives from the chains that they wear. And his disciples know that this is what it is to be a follower of Jesus. And Jesus sets his face to Jerusalem knowing full well the consequence of that walk. Because when he gets to Jerusalem, the conflict that has been brewing around him, frankly, the conflict that Jesus has actually provoked quite a bit. He's not exactly subtle in who he chooses to heal and when he chooses to heal them. He knows that when he gets to Jerusalem, there will be a conflict, a butting of heads between him and the religious leaders, him and the political leaders, and it will result in his death. Jesus is no fool, and he probably knows that. He knows that he has called his disciples to a way of living that they don't seem to get. They still want to set fire to towns, as if somehow that is the reign of God. Friends, how many nations and civilizations have decided that the best way to implement the reign of God in another place is to set fire? Far too many. Jesus has every reason to be frustrated because he has called people, his disciples, to live a particular life. They just don't seem to be getting it, and yet Jesus sets his face forward. He does not look back. Friends, on July 1st, we celebrate Polly Murray. Polly Murray is the first African-American woman to be ordained to the priesthood in the Episcopal Church. And that happened towards the end of her life. Before that, she lived a rather incredible life. Born in the South to a family that insisted on a good education, she was one of the first people to be arrested for refusing to get up from her seat on a bus in the 1940s, 20 years before Rosa Parks was arrested. She was on a bus headed back south to visit her family, and when she crossed the Mason-Dixon line, she just was not going to get up from her seat. And the white bus driver pulled the bus over, called the police, and she and her friend were arrested 20 years before Rosa Parks. When she was a student at Howard University, a group of them went and sat at a lunch counter that they were not allowed to sit at because they were black. And they got arrested 20 years before the famous Woolworth sit-ins that we know about. Polly Murray applied to Harvard Law School, which did not accept women, so she did not get in. She did not get in even though President Franklin Delano Roosevelt wrote a letter on her behalf. Why? Because Polly was really good friends with Franklin's wife, Eleanor. In the corner over there is a typewriter saying, "Dear Mrs. Roosevelt," because she was known for this long-term exchange of letters with Eleanor Roosevelt because she didn't agree with FDR's practices, and so she went through his wife. Polly Murray was one of the founding members of the National Organization of Women with Betty Friedan. How many of you knew that? Okay. How many of you knew that Betty Friedan was associated with the National Organization of Women? More hands. Friends, Polly Murray is a black woman, and so she gets written right out of history. Polly Murray was queer. She had a female partner most of her life, and if a transition had been available to her, she probably would have been a trans man, from her own stories. Polly Murray had every reason to be frustrated at the world around her. Sitting at lunch counters to no effect, getting arrested on buses to no effect. As a matter of fact, while she was a student at Howard Law School, she wrote a paper making an argument for how one should integrate the schools, and her almost entirely male class and entirely male professors rejected her paper. It was a bad argument. It was ridiculous. It wasn't going to work. 10 years later, Thurgood Marshall, while trying to figure out how to take down and defend Brown versus the Board of Education, remembered that paper because he was one of her professors. Her argument became the foundation for overturning discrimination in our schools. She had every reason to be frustrated. She committed herself to study and work and activism, and nobody seemed to get it. Similar to Jesus, she turned her face to a goal of justice, of a practice, of a life lived where people are healed, where the hungry are fed, and where prisoners are set free. And for most of her life, it was a failure, friends. It was a failure. But she set her face forward. She did not look back. Because she was committed as a disciple of Jesus to live out the truth in a way that cared for everybody around her. Not just herself, but all of those in need. She wrote about the Woolworth sit-ins. She has a great autobiography Polly Murray, Song in a Weary Throat. She wrote about the Woolworth sit-ins and having seen it be effective, and she just said, wrong time, wrong place. But she recognized that those students in Atlanta learned from her, learned from the people that she had sat at a counter with, learned about the effectiveness of being arrested on a bus. Friends, we live in a time where I think that many of us feel profoundly powerless. We feel powerless to stop what we see happening around us. We feel powerless to know how to welcome the stranger in a land that has decided that even if you're born here, you cannot stay here. We feel powerless in the face of armed militia in the streets of our cities. We feel powerless in the face of so many laws criminalizing people's bodies. Polly Murray experienced every single one of those things. So many people of Jesus experienced every single one of those things. Friends, we do not live in unprecedented times. The times that we live in are indeed precedented. We see over and over and over again the way in which otherness and difference is solved by violence. Let's burn it down, let's make it illegal, let's criminalize them, let's put them in jail, let's deport them somewhere else. But that is not the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus is to set our face towards the reign of God. A reign of God characterized not by anger and lust and impatience, as Paul says, but by faith and hope and love and kindness and self-control. And we live that life even in the face of those who would provoke us to live otherwise. Friends, Jesus understands the urgent. Jesus understands that sometimes we need to put down the day-to-day things that we might do in our lives so that we can heal somebody, so that we can set a prisoner free, so that we can comfort someone who is unhoused, so that we can bring a meal to someone who is shut in, perhaps so that we can protest when laws around us change in a way that hurts those we know and love and those we don't know, and maybe, friends, even those we don't love. May we be a people in this time like Jesus, who can set our face towards practices of compassion and justice and mercy, where the sick are healed, the blind are given sight, the captives are set free. And may we not look back. Amen.